Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast. This is two podcasts in one. One where we dive into tons of interesting topics, and another where we dive into tons of interesting books and stories. My name is Kevin O'Keefe. So today, let's learn and read the Iliad. Yes, this podcast episode is being released in July of 2026, and the biggest cultural event is Christopher Nolan's film adaptation of the Odyssey. So many people are looking forward to it, and think about it. This story, the Odyssey, is one of the earliest stories ever written down, and certainly ever told, and certainly the one that has lasted the longest. But before the Odyssey was the Iliad. And guess what? They were both written by the same person. Or we think they were written by the same person. Homer. This is in the public domain. Yes, I can read the whole story to you. So this is going to be the first episode where if you live on this planet, you need to know these two stories, beginning with the Iliad, because it's really the foundation, the first really important story that everyone, like I said, should know. You study it beginning in high school through college. It's dense. It's hard to read, depending upon the translation. But hey, this story, again, both of them, but we're going to start with the Iliad today. The Iliad is available for all ages. There's actually a graphic novel for both that was recently released in the last 10 years. And again, stay here up front. I'm going to give you some background on the Iliad, right? It's important to know the background. I'll give you some details on the major characters prior to us going into the story. And yes, for all ages, I'm going to read you the story of the Iliad. This is Greek mythology at its best. So, let's learn. If you've ever heard the phrase Achilles' heel, this is my Achilles' heel. If you've seen the movie Troy, or if you've heard about this legendary Trojan horse, then you've already encountered pieces of this story. And here's the thing. The Trojan horse isn't actually in the Iliad. That's the story for our next episode in the Odyssey and later Greek legends. Today we're focusing on the original epic that made heroes like Achilles and Hector. Yes, Hector, immortal. It was written by Homer during the 8th century BC, which is basically 2,700 years ago. And like I said, scholars, historians actually debate whether Homer was real, if he was one person, if he was several people. But he's given the name Homer because of this long storytelling tradition. And again, it was passed down through generations. That's what historians come down firmly on, that it was verbally told, and then finally it was written down. So just to make this clear, it was written approximately in 800 BC by Homer. But the events surrounding the story, what actually happened in the story, those events happened like 400 years before, in the year 1200 BC. And one final point before we go into the history in terms of what's going on here, what is the story ultimately about? We will also have a story about the actual Trojan War, the actual ending of the Trojan War. If you've heard about this Trojan horse, you've got to know that story too, because the Iliad touches on it and the Odyssey touches on it, but they don't actually talk about the actual Trojan horse and what happened at the end of the war. So we will cover this really in a trilogy of stories. But getting back to the Iliad, because that's this episode. Why has it lasted so long? It's about a war. But it's about more than that. It's about all these eternal human emotions: pride, honor, friendship, loss, anger, forgiveness. Yeah, beginning, middle, and end. So let's get to it. The story takes place at the end of this Trojan War. It actually covers only 50 days during the 10th and final year of the Trojan War. Yes, this Trojan War lasted 10 years, so we're only talking about 50 days. And what does the Iliad mean? That word, the Iliad, it means in Greek a poem about Ilion. What is Ilion? Ilion is the ancient Greek name for the city of Troy. And yes, Romans started calling the area Troia, and it was eventually morphed into the word we know today as Troy. And you have to understand this. For thousands of years, people didn't think that the actual city of Troy existed. But in the late 1800s, two archaeologists, Frank Calvert and German Heinrich Schliemann, found it. Yes, and most historians believe it's there. It's amazing archaeology find, and it's right there in present-day northwestern Turkey. And if you look at a map where Greece is, back then and still today, you have Greece, and then as you move east, you have the Aegean Sea, and sticking out there is the country of Turkey, and Troy was at a strategic spot right there in the northwest corner of present-day Turkey. This is where the story takes place. And you may be thinking up front, well, if this is all about the Trojan War, and it's the last few months of the Trojan War, what's going on with this war? It was all about a woman. And she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Her name was Helen. Greek mythology tells us that she was married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Meanwhile, in Troy lived this young prince named Paris. Well, one day, Paris was asked to judge which of the three most powerful goddesses deserved a golden apple marked for the fairest. The three goddesses were Hera, who is the queen of gods, Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom, and Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love. Each tried to persuade Paris. Hera promised him power, Athena promised him wisdom and victory in battle, but Aphrodite offered something neither of the others could. She promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite. Soon afterward, he traveled to Sparta. And yeah, he was after Aphrodite's prize. Aphrodite promised him Helen, the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. He kidnapped her. But did he? It's been debated for thousands of years. No, she went willingly with him. She fell in love with him. Either way, she was taken away from the king. And this enraged all the Greeks. This was an international crisis. Menelaus called his brother, who is another king in another Greek city-state. His name was Agamemnon. One by one, Greek kings honored an earlier oath that had been sworn to protect Helen's marriage. Everyone across the Greek peninsula got together. They got ships together, thousands of ships, and they sailed across the Aegean Sea towards Troy. And who was in Troy? Who controlled the area? Yeah, they were known as the Trojans. The Trojans against the Greeks. Was this a war? Yes, we still believe today there was a battle. There was a conflict. The Trojan War lasted 10 years. But was it really about a woman, Helen of Troy? I guess we're going to have to leave that to our imagination. But just know, as we begin the story of the Iliad, We are now in the last years, the last few months of this war, the Trojan War. So our story begins. The war had dragged on, like I said, for 10 exhausting years. Thousands had died. The mighty walls of Troy still stood. And the Greeks were growing desperate. They couldn't get inside the city of Troy. And the greatest warrior in the world is about to make a decision that will change everything. I mean, it is so long that fathers from Greece had missed birthdays that they never got back. Brothers had been buried. Friends had fallen. Thousands of men had fought and died on the battlefield. And yet these walls of Troy still stood. The Greeks had won battles. They had captured nearby towns. They had gathered treasure, but Troy still refused to fall. The war was at a stalemate. No one knew how it was going to end. And here is the turning point. It was between Achilles, the greatest warrior anyone had seen, and Agamemnon, the commander of the entire Greek army. If Agamemnon was the king who gave the orders, Achilles was the man who made those orders possible. No Trojan wanted to face Achilles. Stories of his speed and skill had spread across the battlefield for years. His arrival in combat could send entire groups of soldiers running. The Greeks believed that as long as Achilles fought beside them, victory was still possible. But even the greatest hero can be defeated by his own pride. The fighting between these two men began when a plague swept through the Greek camp. Men who had survived years of combat suddenly got fevers and passed away. Horses passed away, died on the spot. Campfires burned beside rows of fresh graves. Fear spread almost as quickly as the sickness itself. According to legend, the plague had been sent by the god Apollo because Agamemnon refused to return a captive woman to her father, who is one of Apollo's priests. Reluctantly, Agamemnon agrees, but his pride will not allow him to suffer the loss alone. If I must give up my prize, then I will take someone else's. His eyes settled on Achilles. The woman that he takes is Briseis. Who is Briseis? She is the woman who had been awarded to Achilles after one of his victories. She belongs to Achilles. Among the Greek warriors, gifts like Briseis were more than rewards. They were symbols of honor. Every soldier in the camp knew that Briseis had been given to Achilles because of his courage in battle. Now, in front of the entire army, Agamemnon ordered his men to take her away. A hush fell over the camp. Every eye turned towards Achilles. You could see it. The rage was building inside of him. For one moment, he reached for his sword. Only the voice of the goddess Athena stopped him from drawing it. Achilles slowly released the handle of his sword. Then he spoke the words that stunned everyone. If this is how my king repays my loyalty, then let him fight his own battles. With that, Achilles turned his back on the war. He walked down to the shoreline, gathered his loyal soldiers, and went to his ships. The greatest warrior in Greece would fight no more. The Greeks figured, no, they could still continue. But no, the Trojans sensed almost immediately that something had changed. From the towering gates of Troy rode their greatest champion, Hector. If Achilles was the heart of the Greek army, Hector was the heart of Troy. People loved him, not because he was looking for fame, but because he fought for them. Behind the city's greatest wall were thousands of people that depended on him for their survival. Hector knew that if Troy fell, everything they loved would fall with it. So he led the Trojan army with courage and determination. Day after day, the Trojans pushed the Greeks further and further back. The battlefield had been locked in a stalemate for years. Now it suddenly belonged to Troy. The Greeks were forced back toward the sea, closer and closer to their ships. Those ships were their only way home. If the Trojans reached them and set those ships on fire, the whole Greek army would be trapped right there and then with nowhere to escape. Panic began spreading through the entire Greek camp. Again and again, the messengers hurried to Achilles' tent. "Please, we need you." They were begging him. "Everyone needs you. King Agamemnon admitted he had been wrong. He offered Achilles gold. He offered him the best horses, treasures, everything. He even promised to return Briseis and honor Achilles before the entire army." But Achilles shook his head. It was all about his pride. Right now, that ruled over his desire to win. "I'm not going to fight." Every day, more and more Greek soldiers passed away on the battlefield. Watching all of this was Achilles' closest companion, Patroclus. The two men had fought side by side for years. They had survived battles together. They trusted each other more than anyone else in the world. Patroclus watched wounded soldiers being carried off the battlefield. He watched smoke rising from the Greek ships. He listened to the cries of the dying men. Finally, he could remain silent no longer. He walked into Achilles' tent. "My friend, if you cannot forgive Agamemnon, then let me fight in your place. Let me wear your armor. While the Trojans see it shining in the sunlight, they'll believe Achilles has returned. Perhaps that alone will drive them back. My friend, do it for us. Do it for everyone. Do it for me." Achilles was quiet. He looked toward the battlefield. He knew his friend was right. At last, he nodded. "You may wear my armor. Drive the Trojans away from the ships. Save our men." Then his voice grew really serious. "But listen carefully. Once you're driven them back, come home. Do not chase them. Do not attack the walls of Troy. Do not seek glory. Promise me." Patroclus promised. He left the tent wearing Achilles' magnificent armor, and everyone recognized it. The bronze helmet gleamed through the sun. The shield flashed like fire across the battlefield. Trojan soldiers looked up, and for a moment, for a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the voices began shouting, "Achilles! Achilles has returned!" Fear spread through the Trojan ranks. The Greeks, seeing that they had believed was the greatest hero charging into battle once again, they found their courage. With a thunder of shields and spears, they rushed forward. The Trojans began falling back. The Greek ships were saved. For the first time in days, hope swept through the Greek camp. Patroclus fought with courage, without fear. Victory suddenly seemed within reach, and then everything stopped. Patroclus remembered the thrill of battle, the cheers of his fellow officers and his fellow soldiers, the sight of the Trojans running before him. Without realizing it, he forgot Achilles' warning. Instead of stopping, he kept going past the ships across the battlefield towards the towering walls of Troy. There, standing before the city he had sworn to protect, was Hector. The Trojan prince watched the warrior in Achilles' armor racing towards him. He lowered his spear, tightening his grip on his shield, and he stepped forward. Neither man knew it yet, but the next few moments would change the course of the Trojan War forever. Both of them charged towards each other. Patroclus, wearing Achilles' magnificent armor, believed he could finish what so many others had failed to do. Hector? Well, he thought he was facing Achilles himself. They'd go at each other. For a time, the battle was a draw. Then Hector saw his chance. With one powerful thrust, his spear found its mark. Patroclus staggered backward. His strength began to leave him. As he fell to the ground, Hector pulled off the great helmet and stared into the face before him. It wasn't Achilles. It was his friend Patroclus. A hush was over the battlefield. With his final breaths, Patroclus looked at Hector. "You may have defeated me," he whispered, "but Achilles is on his way." Then he closed his eyes. The news spread through the Greek camp with incredible speed. Patroclus was dead. When the message got to Achilles, his buddy, he couldn't believe it. He had sent his closest friend into battle. He had watched him lead. Now he would never see him again. Achilles collapsed in grief. He covered his head in his hands and he cried. He openly wept. The man whose anger had kept him from fighting suddenly realized what his pride had cost. No victory, no treasure, no argument was worth the life of his best friend. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he stood. His eyes were filled with grief, with sorrow, but they were also filled with determination. "I am returning to battle. Where is Hector? I am after Hector. He will see my rage." Word spread all through both armies. Everyone was ready. Achilles was now coming. But there was a problem. Achilles had no armor. He had no protection. He was going into battle with nothing. Achilles' mother, Thetis, found out about this, and she begged the blacksmith of the gods, Hephaestus, to help. He worked throughout the night. Piece by piece, he created this magnificent new armor unlike anything the world had ever seen. The helmet was polished gold. His breastplate shone through the sunlight, and the shield, it was a masterpiece. Hephaestus had carved the world itself. All the hopes and dreams of everyone in this one piece of armor. The Greek soldiers stared in amazement. The Trojan watched in fear. Achilles marched towards the battlefield. No one dared to stand in his way. The Trojans fled through the safety of their walls. One after another, they disappeared through the city gates. Only one man stayed outside. Yeah, it was Hector. But no, his father pleaded with him. "Hector, come back. Don't fight." His mother pleaded with him. No. His wife prayed. But Hector knew that someone had to stand up and face the mighty warrior Achilles. If he ran now, what kind of leader would he be? Achilles moved closer to Hector. Hector moved closer to Achilles. For the first time, Hector actually hesitated. He turned and ran around the walls of Troy. They raced once, twice, 3 times. The soldiers on both sides watched in silence. Finally, Hector stopped. He couldn't run anymore. He turned to face Achilles. The 2 greatest warriors of the age stood alone beneath the walls of Troy. Each knew that only one would walk away. Hector threw his spear. It missed. Achilles answered with his own. His spear struck Hector. The Trojan prince Hector fell to the ground. As his strength faded, Hector looked up at his enemy. "I ask you only one thing, Achilles. When I am gone, return my body to my father." But grief had hardened Achilles' heart. He could only think of his friend Patroclus. No. Hector took his last breath. Then he was gone. Achilles tied Hector's body behind his chariot, and he dragged him across the battlefield before the walls of Troy, while the people of the city watched in horror. The people of Troy mourned the loss of the man who had defended them for so many years. Yet even after his revenge, Achilles found no peace. Every night he thought of Patroclus. Every morning he remembered Patroclus. His anger had defeated Hector, but he could not erase his sorrow. Then one quiet night, everything changed. An old man entered the Greek camp alone. There were no soldiers beside him, no armor, no weapons, only courage. It was Hector's father, King Priam, the father of the man Achilles had killed. Slowly, the king walked through the enemy camp until he reached Achilles' tent. He stepped inside. Achilles looked up in surprise. Before anyone could speak, the old king did something that no one expected. He knelt before Achilles. He took his hand, the very hands that had killed his son, and he kissed his hand. "My son is gone," Priam said. "I have come to bring him home." The tent felt silent. Priam looked into Achilles' eyes. "Think of your own father. Think of your own father," he said. "He too is an old man. He too hopes that one day his son will return." For a long moment, Achilles said nothing. He thought of his own father far away in Greece. He imagined him growing older with every passing year, waiting, wondering, praying. Suddenly, Achilles understood. The grief sitting before him was the very same grief he had carried inside him. The two enemies began to cry. One was mourning his son, the other mourned his closest friend. For a moment, there were no Greeks, there were no Trojans, there were no kings, no heroes, only two men whose heart had been broken by war. Achilles rose to his feet. He gently helped Priam to his feet. Then he ordered Hector's body to be washed with care and wrapped in clean cloth so that his father would remember him with dignity. When everything was ready, Achilles placed Hector in Priam's wagon. He promised that the Greeks would not attack while Troy buried its greatest defender. The old king thanked him. Then, under the cover of darkness, King Priam slowly returned to Troy with his son Hector. The gates opened, the people gathered. The city that had watched Hector ride out to battle so many times now welcomed him home one last time. The Trojans mourned, his family mourned, the soldiers mourned. The funeral fires were prepared, and with Hector's funeral, our story comes to an end. The war, however, was still not over. Those walls of Troy still stood. And yes, the Greek army still waited outside the city. Both sides knew the final chapter had not been written yet. No one could imagine that victory would come not through the strength of an army, but through the most daring and most ingenious plan ever imagined. Yeah, a giant wooden horse. But that story is for next time. So what are the lessons of the Iliad, this amazing story? Pride can divide. Pride can wound. Anger can blind us. And yes, the eternal stories of mankind go through from Achilles right through today. Friendship can inspire us. Compassion can heal us. And even in the middle of war, two enemies can come together and discover that they have more in common than they have that divides them. They're both human. In our next episode, we're going to return to Troy and the end of the Trojan War. And yes, like I said, there's this little story about this Trojan horse. We're going to wrap up our trilogy with the Odyssey, which is Homer's second masterpiece. He wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. He didn't touch on, very briefly he did, but he really didn't touch on the story of the Trojan horse. But we will. When we get to the Odyssey, we're going to be introduced to Odysseus. And he begins one of the greatest adventures ever told, which is this long, dangerous voyage back, dealing with monsters, storms, gods, temptations, and all these challenges. all in an effort to find his way home, because isn't what that we all want, to find our way home. Friends, thanks for taking this journey, learning and reading and hearing the story of the Iliad by Homer. Reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. We are on Facebook. We are on X, which is known as Twitter. We are on YouTube. We are on Spotify. We are on iHeartRadio. Anywhere where you get your podcasts, subscribe, rate, and review. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, anyone. I always appreciate it. Until next time, in the story of the Trojan horse and then the Odyssey, have fun and keep learning.